Good afternoon. My name is Felix Gastager. I'm a business unit manager in the company HVD. I'm working for HVD since quite a while in different kind of roles, scientifically and commercially. So I have today the pleasure being invited to talk to you about improved diagnosis and management for the allergic patient, and using for that the latest publication from colleagues in Spain, which I like to introduce you. Before going into these publications and the details that are shown and different kind of possibilities, I would like to stress here a few points, and here to repeat also, we are, I believe, knowing this kind of symbol from the iceberg very well, that sensitization is a prerequisite, but sensitization is not all. It means that sensitization will lead us to detect specific Ig antibodies, but only the sensitization plus the associated clinical manifestation will lead us to have allergy diagnosed. Though we can use different kind of tools to distinguish between non-atopic population and atopic population, and patients suffering on a different kind of IgE mediated allergic conditions. And when we look upon a bit to the history, we can see that on the beginning we had the possibility only to distinguish between non-atopic and atopic, and later on over the years different kind of technologies allowed us to group those positive found cases and name those groups classes. This is, please, history. It's vintage. It's old stuff. Today, we're all using computers, we use mobiles, we are traveling with different devices. Some are using only electric cars, etc. So we are using metrics. And we use ISO standards like seconds, kilos, meters. That is a standard which is used for all of us in different approaches and in different kind of reuse ratios. However, in IgE antibody measurement, there's also a possibility to be precise, quantitative with our measurement. And we express, therefore, with a precise measurement, our findings in kilo-unit antigen per liter. This is possible, and we can distinguish between 0.1 as a limit of quantification, also a limit of detection, up to 100 kilo-unit per liter, the specific Ig allergen. So this is one part that is very essential to have a precise measurement of the specific Ig antibody. Why? Because this leads us also to another findings. Today we are using allergen sources. We look upon allergen sources as a deliverer of the IgE antibodies that causes the symptoms, but it's not the allergen source. It is the protein, the allergen component that is really connected to the allergenic symptoms. And this can be expressed here in this scheme. We have here 8 patients, and these 8 patients, they all express symptoms for grass, and you see these red bars here. So they are indicating the concentration of the whole extract from the grass, in this case Timothy grass. But all the patients react to different proteins within the grass, so they have a different profile of sensitization. And you can see that clearly this patient is reacting or has created IG antibodies, specific IG antibodies, to different proteins from this type of grass, Timothy grass. Whereas this patient reacts mostly to one protein from Timothy grass. So different technologies exist to do all this kind of measurement. Multiplex tests, quantitative specific IgE measurements. In this case, we are using one which is not interfered, for example, from other substances like biotin. When we look upon the allergen source, there are different protein contents and concentration of the proteins occurring. Here I show you an example of 3 allergen sources. And if we look upon the proteins inside the content here, we see that, for example, in allergen source A, you have a very small concentration of this protein. And this could mean that this is missing in an ordinary test. It has a low abundance, could be a substance that is very fragile, but it is important to be measured. Opposite, we have here in A3 a protein that is well distributed in a higher concentration, but also has a clinically defined role, clear risk profile, for example. Whereas in A2 protein, the limit of quantification is important. Opposite an A3 protein, you need to have a test system that clearly can distinguish between atopic and non-atopic situations. And here in the group B and C, you see among an overlapping part, this protein C1, which are the markers, so to say, for the cross-reactive substances. And C2, as the marker only expressed in allergen source C, is identified as a primary allergen. This is the one which is of interest to be identified when there should be a decision made if a patient should be used to receive allergen immunotherapy. I brought here some examples also. Here we see this could be Hep B5 from latex, Core1 from hazelnut, West B5 from wasp, from soy, Gliam4, 319 as a wheat protein, and in those parts where we need a clear distinguishing of the specificity between positive and negative one, with RH2 from peanut, Core14 from hazelnut, Gliam5 and 6 from soy, FeLD2 from the cat, alpha-gal. So you see those are real well-known Pro-P3 allergens indicating a certain role in the patient's conditions. Polkarcine and profilines is a widely used identification for cross-reactivity. The genosensitizers for PETV1, OE1, FLAPB1, 5 for the grasses, etc. So here we can group and give an example why we need to have a clear measurement, a quantitative method to separate correctly among the different sensitizations. One other important work is coming from Donald McGlashan, already published 2001, 2005, and they investigated following question. If I have a mast cell, how many of the total IgE can be loaded on the mast cell? And there was a finding about 200,000, so 4,000, 200,000, 200,000 as an average. And when you have a mast cell loaded with the total IgE. Question would be, how many of those, a specific IgE as a part of the total IgE, are needed to see symptoms in patients? And we see here on top of this little graph here, the curve of histamine release, and 50% of this maximum curve can be reached by only 1% binding of the specific IgE per cell from this total IgE. So it means, in other words, all what you need is just 1% specific IgE covering. That is enough cross-linking, bridging to release histamine, causing then the inflammation in the patient to have then the certain symptoms that you see expressed in the patient. Why is this important? Why do I show you all this before going to the deep part of this new concepts? Is that when we measure specific IgE, when we measure total IgE, we could have, let's say, two extremes. We have here the distribution of the patients. This is the light gray part here, and that expresses the total IgE. On the upper side, you can find here, for example, a patient with 4,000 kilounits per liter and a specific IgE with 8 kilounits per liter. Usually, according to the experiences and instructions for use from the manufacturer, that would be identified as a clear positive case in for IgE detection, and confirmed by 8 kilounits, clearly above the cutoff. But is this on the measurement that we find here clinically relevant, important in relation to the symptoms? When we see on the other side, on the lower IgE concentration found, 4 kilounits, that's usually below 20 kilounits to be considered as negative, and close to the cutoff of specific IgE found, specific IgE of 0.2 kilounits per liter. What does this tell us? Here, if we take 8 by 4,000, we get a ratio of 0.2. This means that it is clearly below 1%. So it is not really the specific IgE that cross-links and releases all the mediators. No, that is a sensitization that has been found correctly, no doubt about it, but it is not the real trigger. Whereas here we have a patient with 4 kilounits, the total IgE, 0.2 for the specific IgE, and if we take 0.2 by 4, we get 5%. 5% is clearly more than 1%. So this is the allergen which contributes clearly to the symptom of the patient. So it's not only the concentration value, if it's high or low, that gives us the indication. It is the ratio of the specific IgE among the total IgE that plays an important role. Can we measure that? We measure accurately, that we measure precise as it should be? There is a tool that is possible to do so, and that had been published the first time I saw from Johns Hopkins University colleagues, and they have done the following. They took from human IgE, the Fc part, from mouse monoclonal allergen-specific antibodies, the FAB part. They put both together and created an artificial antibody, so-called chimeric antibody, with then the specificity for mite or for birch pollen in this case. Why is this so interesting? Can be explained in the next picture. When you have this kind of chimeric antibody, you have in here two binding sites, the Fc part and the FAB part. And the FAB part is important because it carries this specificity of the binding for the epitope and the receptors, and then you have this playing the major role of the binding in the specific IgE, whereas in the total IgE assay, it is the Fc part that is binding to the bound IgE and the anti-IgE on the solid phase, catching the IgE antibody from the patient. And the assumption is that the strength of the binding here and here is equal. This leads us to the following experiment. If we have our artificial chimeric antibody, and we use this kind of test method, to measure, so to say, in this experiment, our concentration of allergens, I can do like following. I see here, I measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So my value here is 10. If I would use the same chimeric antibody in a total IgE assay, using same test method, but total IgE, I would measure here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and get the same value. No wonder, because I'm using the same protein, it is the same concentration, and of course, independent whether I'm using specific IgE or total IgE, of course, I have to get the same result. Is this relevant for us to compare, to prove? Yes. And that had been shown from the researchers from the Johns Hopkins University, as I said before. They sent 3 concentrations which they have made in the laboratories of these chimeric antibodies to different laboratories and asked them to measure total IgE and specific IgE for birch and for mite. I show you here the example for the birch. Mite is equal. So the total IgE is fairly for all going well, all different methods, which had been selected because all these methods are FDA cleared. So due to this FDA clearance, those had been the ones which had been selected. The specific IgE, as I said, binding is something to be that's the same in specific and total IgE using this chimeric antibody, is as it is expected. You see here the birch specific IgE and the total IgE, the same here with for 20 kilounits concentration and also for the lower concentration. It means that the calibration for the method of total IgE and the calibration for the specific IgE is working well together. There we see the different methods, how high core method is performing. It does not correlate very well. Here patients are missed clearly because the total IgE and the specific IgE are not working well together. Opposite, this kind of other method here, the imolite, is overexpressing. So there is something else used for the calibration, but it is not doing as it should. This is an example using extracts, and it's clearly showing what is working well, what is measuring precisely. And here we have in 2013, few years later, a repetition. And here the researchers from Denmark, Setsi and Stender, they used specific IgE and total IgE in the same manner. They created chimeric antibodies, they measured components, and they measured whole extracts in this article. You can find this, and if you want, we can provide you with this. And you see here the ratio says 1 as a target line. So the closer to 1 you are, the more accurate you are. And you see here the measurement of the specific IgE for dog, for cat, for birch, and for egg. And the same thing here, dog, cat, birch, and egg. And you see 28, 27. 21, 23 for the specific Ig, for the total Ig, whereas here you see huge differences, and they are expressed in these graphics here. So 1 equals 1, whereas 1 does not equal 1, means that what is measured in one method cannot be compared to another method. There exists no factor to be used to transfer one signal from one measurement method to another measurement method. So how can we use this kind of information? I will show you now in this publication from Spain. Here, 28 researchers, national and international opinion leaders, had been using the Delphi method to come to a conclusion for measuring specific Ig antibodies in different forms, and total Ig and whole allergens, and get more content, more support out from this measurement. And how is this done? That is the assumption. So you have an individuum that expresses different kind of symptoms, rhinitis, conjunctivitis, asthma, whatever. And you start as usual with your anamnesis, with probably skin prick testing, with some further tests, and then continue with serological requests to the laboratory, asking, for example, for extract-based specific Ig for epithelial allergens or for mites. And you get here as a result, so to say, then measurement for the total Ig. You have here 12, and among these 12 you find here 1 IgE, and you find here 6, the red ones, out of the 12 being reported as specific Ig antibodies. Well, this we say this is ratio 1, and what tells ratio 1? If we take the measurement of the 6 by the 12, we see here that the measured specific Ig is relevant, yeah? And especially this is useful in atopic patients, in those where you have extreme low level of total IgE. That could be in patient with atopic dermatitis of use, also with extremely high IgE cases, and atopic dermatitis or bronchial aspergillosis. And you see here whether the selected specific IgE plays a role among the total IgE that is giving this ratio number 1. Of course, one, as you had been trained and had been reading and studying probably, you find in here also the possibility to continue the measurement, to look deeper into the background, and use the allergen components to see which of those specific IgE shows what kind of family members of the components being relevant for the symptoms. And this is something that we call here, in this case, ratio number 2. What will ratio number 2 give us as an advantage? It tells us an evaluation of the sensitization to the given allergen component. It means if the found component appears in a very small concentration, that here probably there's a sensitization to an untested or an unknown component, that you miss the one that is triggering. Or if the component is in a higher concentration, a given component is underrepresented in the whole extract. For example, as I showed you before, at HepB5, that could be one of those labile proteins or rare concentration among the other proteins in the allergen source. So ratios, ratio 1 and ratio 2, are contributing the diagnosis very well. So what to do? Before clinical decision, the considering of the ratio, the whole extract by the total IgE, so-called ratio number 1, is supporting to see if the whole extract is contributing to the sensitization of the patient. Whereas the ratio number 2, the component by the whole extract, is also useful, be used before clinical decisions made, for example, whether or not patients should go under allergen immunotherapy, and to see an involvement of the certain component among the sensitization. Also, the ratio 2, according to the recommendation from the authors, tells it is to identify the allergic patient for those allergens that are poor represented in the whole extract. If we have here a primary sensitizer, that is important to consider when allergen immunotherapy is thought to be used, or if it is at all suitable. We come now to some examples. So this had been all concluded by a scientific group of 28 researchers and opinion leaders from Spain and other parts in Europe. And here we see the first example. A 25-year-old patient with persistent moderate rhinoconjunctivitis and mild intermediate bronchial asthma with exacerbation in humid regions during spring and in autumn. So had been tested with skin prick test and found positive to house dust mite. So not a very uncommon situation, I would say. And what had been done? Total IgE was the first step. Total IgE measured is 152 kilounits. The whole allergen for the mites gives a value of 130 kilounits. So these 130 kilounits correspond very well to the total IgE of 152. So we get a ratio of 86%, which is confirming the sensitization to the mite. Next would be the following with the ratio number 2, and this ratio number 2 requisites that you are testing components, and here the DP1, DP2 had been selected, but the measured value found is 1.8 and 3.2 kilounits per liter only, which gives us a ratio of 1.38 and 2.46, which is really very low, and there is missing something, as you can see, from the found values. That is obvious. So it means that here is something else contributing to these numbers here. And when this group of mite allergens is extended with DP23, it can be found that this is the real contributor of the symptoms here. It is DP23. In other words, the main sensitizer for the symptoms on that is DP23. And this is a very relevant information for the clinician to select the proper extract for the further management of the patient. So it's not only to see that DP23 is positive, but also that role it plays among the sensitization profile. Another case here we see here is a young boy, 15 years old, with persistent asthma and during spring season, rhinoconjunctivitis. The family has a dog. They saw automatically attention as suspected for allergy. Skin prick testing showed a positive result to the dog tender and to the grass extract. Well, the total IgE is slightly above this cutoff, used often 100 kilounits, so 112 kilounits, and might have been negative, I want to say, and grass is increased, and a dog is clearly supporting the orientation for the question whether or not the dog is the main sensitizer, with 31%. But then when you look into the components, you see that kind of 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all negative. Oh, no, sorry. 1, 2, and 3 is negative. 4, kind of 4 is slightly increased. But here it seems that kind of 5, the prostaglandin, is increased. Would mean until now that this is a patient who probably would benefit if you select a female dog instead of a male dog, because kind of 5 occurs only in, of course, of this prostaglandin in male dogs. Well, is this the whole story? Therefore, we need the ratio. And if you take the ratio of kind of 5, you see it contributes only 12%. So probably another molecule is the main sensitizer, as we see it here in the graph. And yes, it is kind of 6, another lipocalin, which contributes here very much. So it would not help to switch from a male to a female dog. Here, the patient simply needs to be informed that it is the dog dander that primary attributes due to the lipocalins, and it is the advice to avoid both male and female dogs. Here is 1, 2 cases more. 45-year-old male patient. He likes to produce some honey, and is an amateur beekeeper, but got an anaphylactic shock after bee sting. But beekeepers seems not to be an uncommon situation. Skin prick testing showed a very positive result for the honeybee, and what we found here in this from the serology, also not too high in value on the total IgE, and the clear ratio orientation 40%. That is enough to explain the patient's symptoms. So case could be closed, but what to do with the patient? So for this purpose here, the components have been taken here into consideration to seek some support and help. And you can see RPM1 is increased, RPM3 is low, and RPM5 is now negative, and RPM10 has 52 kilounits. So among all those components, it turned out that the rare substance of RPM10, but valuable and important allergen protein, is contributing here most of the sensitization. So when there is a criteria to select the right and correct allergen immunotherapeutic extract, it is to consider that the RPM10 is here contributing most of the sensitization. Otherwise, there is a high risk that the extract used is not giving the proper result after the allergen immunotherapy that would be expected, and there is a risk of further anaphylaxis situation from the patient when another bee sting appears. Case study here for food allergy. Here we have a 26-year-old woman with a family and personal history of egg allergy. Also, at certain season, then showing rhinitis symptoms due to the birch pollen sensitization. The patient were looking for help due to general urticaria, facial angulema, and gastrointestinal symptoms after a meal which consists of pasta, beef, and hazelnut ice cream. So something that we all can imagine what it could be. Positive finding from the skin prick test contributed to the hazelnut extract and the birch pollen, but that is clear that birch was already known. Negative for beef and for the wheat, so the pasta seems to be fine. Is this the case? Is this true? Only further investigation in the laboratory can tell us precisely. Total IgE, surprisingly, is low. So that is not really saying alarm. No, it is just hazelnut that contributes a little bit with a little increasing of core 1 of 0.3, it would be with the old classes, which we should not use anymore, even be not considered in many cases. So hazelnut is not clinically relevant. It gives us 0.6. You remember 1% would be the minimum. So this is something that is not really relevant. And when we look to the components here, it was core 1, which is increased. Yes, very high, but this is a PR10 homologue. And so it is based on cross-reactivity to the known birch pollen allergy. So what else could be involved here? Wheat, no, we saw already. Wheat had been not reactive in the, not positive in with the skin prick test, and we see there is no sensitization found also in the from the laboratory test. Opposite, I mean, when the beef was reported, we found here alpha-gal with 2.3 kilounits. Considering 2.3 kilounit from the alpha-gal as a very rare substance, and the whole beef, if you calculate the ratio, you clearly find here that the ratio is clinically relevant and extremely increased. So the proper reply here on this patient is, don't be afraid of hazelnut ice cream, or you can have some oral allergy symptoms probably. This is caused to the birch pollen sensitization. Maybe there is an improvement on the symptoms when you do an allergen immunotherapy. That cannot be predicted, but definitive for avoiding future situations like that, avoid red meat, and you will have an improved quality of life. So this is the big advantage that you can gain using this new concept. There is nothing that needs to be changed. If you are considering the situation of the suspicion of respiratory allergy, Hymenoptera venom allergy, food allergy, anaphylactic cases, I mean, the initial diagnosis, take the medical history, the anamnesis, you do some skin prick test, probably some extra investigations, and then add for the investigation from the laboratory, the total IG, and try to put it in relation with the whole allergens that you suspect, and then continue with components. So far, so good. What is the advantage of this new novel concept is now the interpretation. And if we see clearly that this whole allergen of the extract is lower than the measured total IgE, then there might be a complete different allergen involved in the sensitization. If the whole allergen is relevant and suggestive, then we see clinical symptoms caused by the whole allergen. So it means the whole allergen here is taking a significant higher portion of the total IgE values. And similar, when we investigate the component testings here, we see that the components, if their concentration is clearly lower than the concentration of the whole extract, there are other components involved. If the components is relevant, suggestive to the symptoms, then the symptoms are caused by the found component in the patient. These are the authors, and here we have the publications, so we can support you if you want to have, of course, copies and further information, and we invite you to try with your patient this kind of concept. It is really very, very helpful. And as a summary of the conclusions here, these evidence-based tools, we say novel, but if you look to the PubMed, you will find maybe some 3,000 articles from even 1972 onwards, where ratios had been used in combination to specific IG. There are about 20 all over the years. But new here is that we have the technology to measure correct, quantitative and precise and use this combination of the total Ig and the specific Ig in relation to it. So this ratio analysis is an essential tool for identifying the allergen that is behind this clinical manifestation. So when you remember this picture from the iceberg, you see more what is below under the surface of the sea, what is causing really the symptoms. This technique to determine the ratio requires, of course, to use equal methods. So it cannot be that you combine one method with another method, yeah, or semi-quantitative methods measuring some concentration and expresses that in classes. That is not working here. So that had been checked and proven by 28 international experts using this Delphia technique, and very well described in the article that I mentioned. And with this, I would like to say thank you very much. And if you have questions, please send me your questions. I'm very much looking for your thoughts, and will try my best to answer them in due time. Thank you very much for the invitation, giving me the chance to talk to you, and wish you all the best for using this concept.